Hello, party people. My name is Krista Keough, and you're listening to Granted, the podcast that puts the fun in funding. Today we're in the studio with Nigel Jenkins. He's here for a visit all the way from his hometown of Steadybrook, Newfoundland. Nigel started his career in the music industry as an entertainment lawyer, and today he owns and operates an artist management company and record label called Laughing Heart Music, where he works with bands like Hillsburn, Buttes, and singer-songwriter Kim Harris. I'm looking forward to finding out the secrets to his success and more, so let's get started. Thank you for being here with us today, Nigel.
Thank you for having me. No one's more excited to be here than me right now.
That's awesome. First, I want to say to you, congratulations, because you just got married to your beautiful lady.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Dr. Stephanie Powell up in the Northern Peninsula in Newfoundland and Labrador right now in St. Anthony, working her butt off while I'm in Halifax having fun with my buddies doing a podcast.
That sounds fair. You know, that's what you do. You and I met when when you were living in Halifax, but you're originally from Corner Brook. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, Steadybrook, which is just outside of Corner Brook, and I guess we settled down there 2001. So I would have been 13 years old, or turning 13. My dad was in the military for 20 years as a doctor in the Air Forces, so we moved around a lot.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
I was born in Happy Valley Goose Bay in Labrador.
Okay.
And then all over the place in Canada, even over to Germany for a bit. And Dad retired from the military. His last posting was in Gander. He was actually the first doctor in Canadian military history to ever be a base commander. And so he retired as the base commander, and we moved to Steadybrook, Newfoundland and Labrador.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that sounds beautiful. I didn't know all that.
Yeah.
Stephanie's a big reason why you moved back home, I think, too, right?
Yeah. So, I had been contemplating a move for a little while anyway, just wanting to be back home closer to family. So my mom and dad still live in Steadybrook. My sister Emily lives there with her fiance Ryan. They have a beautiful chocolate lab, Mia. Yeah. And, I was missing sort of place and home, just because Steadybrook was the first spot that we ever lived that really felt like home to me, because we moved around so much growing up. And as much as I loved Halifax, I had been thinking about moving back, and then I was on tour with Hillsburn, who I manage and represent. They were on a Newfoundland run at that time, and I was swiping real hard left and right, mostly left on Tinder. And Stephanie and I connected on Tinder while I was in Newfoundland. And then we sort of kept in touch via text, via Tinder. Well, actually, we switched over to text pretty quick, which is a good sign, maybe.
That is a good sign.
In an early Tinder relationship. And I told her, I come back to Newfoundland lots. She said, I come through Halifax. I have friends. And we ended up having our first date a couple of months later at Lion and Bright downtown, which is now closed, unfortunately. And then I went home pretty soon after that for our second and third dates. And we did the long distance thing for about a year. And then in April of 2018, I proposed. And in May, June of that year, I moved home.
Yeah.
So I've been home for about a year now.
Okay.
Yeah.
That feels good.
It's awesome.
You write a blog on your website, and you're really honest about your experiences and the challenges of being a music industry professional while also trying to maintain this beautiful part of your life that you just described with friends and family and getting enough sleep and eating.
Yeah.
That's a big important part of it. So also in your blog, you once wrote that you watched your father work 15 hours a day for a decade building his company, and that has a big impact on you. And you just mentioned your dad. So can you tell me a bit about that? Yeah,
and maybe I'll just provide some more context for that. I think I had sort of a model or a framework in, my father and both of my parents of a really incredible work ethic. And I don't recall the exact context of that, what I said in that blog. But I had two very present, very active parents, and I was very fortunate in that way. I think I was parented as well as a person can be parented. And I feel very, very lucky for having had that. My dad, specifically since you asked about him, was the coach of all of my baseball teams growing up. and was very active in supporting my early music career efforts. I played in a lot of bands in junior high and high school, and Dad at one point for one of my high school bands bought like a full used PA so we could play like an outdoor summer festival.
I love that.
Yeah,
that sounds awesome.
Yeah, and then it actually ended up raining, and I remember vividly looking over and like the soundboard had exploded and caught on fire. Yeah, it was a bit of a rigmarole. That summer actually was pretty like informative or constructive in terms of the way the rest of my life played out, because as I mentioned, I'd played a lot of baseball from age 5 to about 16, and then like 14 to 16, 17 was when I started really getting serious into playing music.
Oh, wow,
and
okay.
I had to choose this one summer when I was around 16 years old between like going to the provincial champs baseball tournament with my baseball team, or like staying home so I could play a festival, because there was like a scheduling conflict. So it was like baseball or music, like
right. I'm so torn.
What's gonna happen? Yeah, and I ended up choosing music. And like, I mean, I don't think there's like any one sort of moment or thing you can ever point to in your life to say like, oh yeah, like that was it. But that was definitely like, yeah. And informative, that's not exactly the word I'm looking for, but like that was an important moment.
Like a paramount time where you were making decisions about what you liked and what you wanted to spend your time doing.
Yeah, so I mean, sorry to get back to the question about Dad, if I said for 10 years, it's been more like, 20, 30 years, his whole career. I mentioned he was in the military as a physician for 20 years, and then he was the vice president of healthcare for Western Newfoundland when we settled down in Steadybrook for a decade, and then started building his own company. And I would see him working like tirelessly, in order to accomplish what he needed to build the thing that he needed to support and provide for his family. And I have no doubt that my own work ethic is modeled after, or is an attempt to mimic, what I saw in Dad specifically. And it's interesting being the like child of someone who has been extremely successful and who has worked very hard for that success. To think about having to like live up to that. I've been presented and provided with so many opportunities in my life, and I've had so much, given to me, and I've had so much support from my family specifically, but then the broader community. It's like there's a pressure that I feel like I'm balancing a lot with needing to accomplish at a very high level, because I have been put in a very privileged position where like I can and should be able to do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really insightful. I didn't know that you felt that way, but now that you're describing it, I can totally picture that.
Yeah.
And you think that, I guess the idea of having privilege is easy. Those things kind of equal each other in other people's minds who maybe don't have those same things or those opportunities. But you're right. I can see how you would feel that kind of pressure.
Yeah.
Because you continued on and went to university.
Yep.
You went to Memorial University in Newfoundland, and then you came to Halifax in 2010 to go to Dalhousie to become a lawyer. So that's a really good example of that.
Yeah, and I don't want to suggest either that like having lots of opportunities is difficult in the same way that like not having those opportunities is, because it's absolutely not the case. It's just, it's a different kind of dynamic to have to like address and deal with internally, you know what I mean?
I do, and I can appreciate that. Yeah, that is something that is part of your truth, so I definitely could see that.
Yeah, and so school was a part of that. That was my sort of my path that I sort of assumed that I would take. Went through an undergrad degree at Memorial University, studied English and French. I loved reading, and I always loved writing. We were talking on the way here about your letter reading.
Yes.
What was sort of the name of the event again?
Oh, grown-ups reading things they wrote as kids.
Right, yeah. So I have like stacks of like journals and paper and notebooks at home from like 14 years old onward of like what I'm sure are completely embarrassing songs and poems and letters to myself and other people.
Great professions of your wisdom. Yes.
Yeah. But I always loved reading. I always loved writing. So English made a whole lot of sense. And I loved it. I had the opportunity at Memorial University in Newfoundland and Labrador to study with Mary Dalton, who I took a couple of creative writing courses for. She's an incredible poet. And I believe is currently the poet laureate for Memorial University, possibly the city of St. John's. It's one or two or both.
Oh, wow.
I studied under Don Mackay, who is another incredible poet and writer who has won, I believe it's the Governor General's Award a couple of times maybe. And he would just casually tell stories about like hanging out with his friend Mike, for example, who, you know, upon further inquiry, it turned out it was Michael Ondaatje who wrote like The English Patient and In the Skin of a Lion. It's like,
oh, wow.
It was a wild time to be like trying my best and failing at being like a young poet person.
Oh, that's nice.
But yeah, had a lot of great learning opportunities there. And then after my undergrad, didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I was like smart and capable, loved reading, I was good at writing, was a confident enough public speaker. So in terms of like wanting to find a stable path and career option for myself, law school kind of felt like the best fit. And then the other sort of family tie back into that is that my grandfather, I believe it was around or at the age of 50, he had worked at the Corner Brook Pulp and Paper Mill most of his life.
Wow. And
then at age 50 retired, uprooted his family from Corner Brook, Newfoundland to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and went to law school here at Dalhousie. Graduated in 1977 and then moved back to Newfoundland where he became a judge because back then you didn't need to be a lawyer for 10 years to be called to the bar or called to the bench the same way you do now. He just like got called to the bar, then got called right to the bench. Which probably made sense. I imagine my granddad and you know, in his 50s, you know, he was a wise and intelligent man, and then he was old and at that point and fairly well known in the community, I'm sure. So I imagine it must have made a lot of sense at the time. But thinking about it now and thinking of myself as someone who, went through that process of graduating from law school and getting called to the bar, can't imagine, having become a judge at that point. But I was 26 or 27 when that happened for me versus granddad who, in 1977 would have been in his earlier mid-50s.
Okay, so it made sense.
Different life position to be in. So anyways, I had that sort of family tie into legal studies, and my Aunt Linda is very involved with the Law Society in Newfoundland and Labrador. And so when I started talking about, possibly pursuing law school, I had a lot of encouragement. And it seemed like, potentially a very stable and secure career path long term. So that's how that happened.
Okay. And then at what point did entertainment law start to come into the mix?
Yeah, so I was thinking about entertainment law even, as I began and going through law school. I was lucky enough to be able to take an entertainment law course in my second or third year, which Chip Sutherland actually came in and guest lectured at. So he contributed to the Canadian edition of the Donald Passman book, Everything You Need to Know About the Music Business. So that was like an incredible privilege. And Chip has been kind enough to like continue to, communicate with me when I reach out with,
that's awesome.
Problems I'm having or issues I've encountered. He's been one of the people that has been extremely generous with his time all the way through. And I've been lucky starting in Halifax. There have been tons of people in Halifax and in Nova Scotia more broadly who right from the get-go have been very generous with their time and advice in that way. I think of Sherry Jones as another person who before I got started as an artist manager, I sent out these Survey Monkey emails sort of inquiring as to what kind of services or support, established music industry people might need. And Sherry was one of the few people who went through my 10-question survey, answered everything, and then emailed me back to give me some more feedback on what I had written about. So a lot of incredible mentors in the Atlantic Canadian music industry, and a lot of folks who I'm indebted to in a way that I don't think I'll ever be able to repay directly, but feel have a desire and feel sort of an obligation to repay or pass on or pay forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is really That's really nice that you think that way. I can see that too, because I feel like a lot of people up until this point have also given me their time.
Yeah.
You are giving me your time today, and we're sharing it all with people. And so you're right. You feel like you were given those supports and opportunities. And then when people come to you who are younger, emerging, new to the game, and they have questions, it's like you do feel like you want to help, because that's one of the ways that we all like learn from each other, because there's NSCC and they have great programs now. It's true. But I suspect when you and I, it's still a fairly new program. In the last 10 years, it's been around, even less than that time. But, and still, I mean, I'm 40. I'm not going to go to NSCC and enroll in the program, especially if you've got a couple of years. So it really is up to us to learn from each other. And that's why community is so important too, I think.
And that's, for me, one of the harder parts of being an artist manager is like when I have people who come to me for help or support, like I want to be able to help everybody. And I try my best on like, sort of one-off free consults, whatever, talk to as many people as I can, but I would love to bring everybody onto the roster. But then I have to balance sort of that desire with my need to properly and adequately service my client base, the folks who are, paying me.
There's that. It's a priority. You're right.
Exactly.
You've got to take care of those people. And then owning your own business, you're doing new business. So you always want to be tuned into who's doing what. So there might be opportunities down the road. You're absolutely right. So I do want to say, for those people listening, in 2015, you established Laughing Heart Music.
Yep.
And it is an artist management company. That's how you started.
Yep.
You signed your first band, Hillsburn, and then since then you've worked with artists like Ben Kaplan, Heather Rankin, and you have a record label now too.
Yep.
You're working with Kim Harris on her next release. You have the Lytics and Buttes on your label, and they're all on the rise among other artists. So I know you're someone who writes a lot of grants.
Yeah.
And we've even worked together in the past, and we've talked about different strategies for funding. And so this goes into what you're saying about being able to serve your clients, is having there's a capacity to the amount of work that you can do, and the ways you can help people. So this is one way we can do it a bit, I guess, because I love that you are someone who I assume has read the guidelines for the programs, right? That you're
lots of times.
lots of times, right?
Yeah.
You're well versed in it, so you're knowledgeable. You probably see it the way that I've seen it in the past, and I see it now. It's kind of like a ladder. There's a system. You move up it from emerging to exporting, right? With the artists you're working with. So can you tell us about how funding plays a role for you as an artist manager?
Yeah, and maybe just before I get into that, like you mentioned starting the company and the first clients, maybe I'll tie the narrative through to that point too a little bit, because we talked about law school. So I did end up graduating from law school. I got called to the bar in Newfoundland and Labrador and then in Nova Scotia, and I worked a job here and ended up, I was working 70, 80 hours a week, which I still do now, but it was in an area that I wasn't feeling fulfilled in or particularly maybe good at.
Right.
And so I ended up quitting that job. And around the same time that I quit my last law firm job that I worked at, my friend Ben Kaplan was going on tour in the United States and needed a tour manager to come on the road with him. So that was like my first sort of dipping my toes into the music business. I flew to New York City and I tour managed for Ben from New York down to Austin, Texas for South by Southwest and sort of back up through.
Wow, that must have been a huge experience for you.
It was really eye-opening and informative. And I think it shaped the way I approached the first couple of years of working as an artist manager, because I did do a lot of work on the road with the artists that I managed in those first couple of years. I went on, a lot of tours with Hillsburn. I've sort of done the sleeping on floors and friends' couches level of touring with them from the beginning all the way up to where they're at now, where we get hotel rooms.
Yay.
Yeah. So anyway, after that tour, I flew myself to the ECMAs in St. John's, Newfoundland. This was 2015 as a volunteer in the export buyers room.
What?
And so I took all the business cards from the export buyers room, came back to Halifax because I still hadn't started my company at this point. I was like technically unemployed.
I was going to say fresh off your job from being a lawyer.
Yeah, and fresh off the tour with Ben, which was like a credibility point, right? Like I'm talking to these people. I don't know what the music industry is, but like, yeah, I just tour managed for Ben Kaplan, and people know who Ben Kaplan is. Mm-hmm. So I take all these cards, and I come back to Halifax, and I wrote everybody, and ended up getting a couple of internships there, and things snowballed. I did the SEED self-employment program, which is offered by the province, the Center for Entrepreneurial Education and Development. It's like a 40-week business incubator kind of self-employment thing. Yes,
I'm glad you brought that up. I did that too, self-employment benefit program.
Yes.
Yes, it's
SEB.
Great. It's that's a really interesting funding kind of quote unquote.
Exactly.
But,
and so the way that works for people who aren't familiar is once you're accepted into the program, They take you through the development process of building your business plan, building your business marketing, like accounting, everything, and pay you a living subsidy. For the first 25 weeks, it was something like $1,400 a month. And then for the last 15 weeks of the program, it drops down to like $1,100 a month on the assumption that you should be making money. But it was a huge reason that I was able to get my business off the ground. Without that funding, like I might not necessarily have had the financial capacity to go 40 weeks.
Take that risk, right? Like you'd have to save up that amount of money thinking or not knowing, okay, is this me starting this business? Is that going to take off? Is it going to turn into something? And what I liked about SEB too, really quick, is you get a mentor, essentially, someone who you meet with very regularly. Who coaches you along, right? Which is, I found so helpful. At the times when you're like, is this going to work? My family thinks I'm crazy. I don't really know what I'm doing. Should I say that or should I just not?
I don't think my family thinks I'm crazy anymore, but certainly there are, friends of the family in the circle, maybe extended family who don't exactly know what's happening.
And not necessarily now because you've got some success, right, under your belt quite a bit. So, but in the beginning, I think hearing I want to work in the music industry. It's like, oh, well, what? Doing what?
Yeah. And so your question was, because I trailed off.
So funny.
But, what sort of role did grant funding play early on? And I think about those early internships, and like the first sort of roles I took on were as a grant funding writer. Because that was like, writing has always been a skill that I've had. And, I sort of read through the program guidelines for Factor, for Music Nova Scotia, for Canada Council, for the SOCAM Foundation, and just set about starting to write grants for artists at the couple of companies that I was doing internships for. So that was like, grant writing was like the first thing I did.
Wow, that was your intro into the strategy behind artist development.
Exactly. And that was so interesting because I was guided by the folks who headed up those companies in my thinking about the way that those grants were structured. Which of course is based entirely in sort of the strategy with which you're approaching these various projects. So how you're approaching a tour with tour support funding grants, how you're supporting the creation of an album. Because this is stuff I all kind of had like a peripheral awareness of, having played lots myself, and I grew up with lots of friends who have gone on to have very successful careers in the music industry. Good friend of mine, Catherine Allen, plays in Fortunate Ones from St. John's, Newfoundland. And, I remember having an acoustic trio band with Catherine and another one of our friends, Zach Robson, in high school called the West Coast Jammers. And at that point, like, Kat wouldn't sing for us unless we turned our backs and like shut the lights off in the basement at her parents' place.
No way.
And now she's in Fortunate Ones, touring all over the world. It's like... And so I've had friends who I've watched do the thing from the outside. So I had some sort of awareness that way. But then actually going through the grant writing process was a really informative part of my journey. And one of the ways that I figured out, like, okay, this is kind of how people are approaching all of these different kinds of projects that you undertake as an artist or an artist manager.
Mm-hmm. Like the release, this is how you do the tour, these are the things you need to plan. The information that they ask you for in the grant application are things that you then understand, okay, this is what I need to put together.
Yep.
They're asking me for this information, so this is what I need to do. So it is helpful. It's somewhat of a guide at times, looking at it from project to project. You know, there's still, of course, being an artist manager, the big picture of what is it that you want to achieve and all those things. Can you tell us about some of the ways that funding has impacted the artists who you work with, who you manage, or maybe even people who have just come to you for advice and things, like experiences that you learned from that were good or bad?
Yeah, so I think my own decision-making process, I aim to work and I want to work with people who I really like, who I believe in, and who are creating music that I love. So those are like the three primary factors when I'm making decisions about who I'm taking on as potential clients. And once we're onboarded, then it's figuring out, okay, where do you stand with these various grant funding bodies and what monies can we access to help you with the things that we want to do?
Okay, so based on their eligibility, based on the kind of music they're making, where they live.
Yeah, exactly.
What stage they're at in their career.
Yep. And then, I'm at a point now where I'm working with artists in a couple of different provinces. I think about Nick Fay over in Saskatchewan, who I've recently signed to a label deal. That's going to be more like a 2021 release probably, but figuring out what's going on in Saskatchewan. I put out an album from the Lytics last year, who are based in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So getting to know the programs at Manitoba Film and Music, Manitoba Music.
Okay.
So it's nice and it's been informative, and there's lots of similarities right across the country, but some differences in terms of program guidelines, funding amounts, eligibility criteria, all that sort of stuff.
Okay, so it does vary then.
Oh, for sure. Yep.
Wow. And then have you had mostly good experiences so far with your applications and the projects going ahead as planned? Like, has there ever been a time when you thought something was going to go one way and then it didn't?
Yeah, mostly positive experiences.
Good.
I feel a certain sense of responsibility now at like a sort of a public level, thinking about the fact that, I've been very lucky and very successful and our grants get approved. Yeah. So I'm starting to think now, like, at some instance, I have to weigh, like, representing my artists and getting as much money as I can for them with, like, the public interest in just like grabbing all these monies out of the public
That's nice
coffers.
That you think about it that way.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're being honest about that, because that is the reality when you are working with artists who have created a lot of momentum. They've put in a lot of time. They're established, like the Hillsburns, like the Ben Kaplans, and they're doing projects regularly, and they do qualify. I can remember when I was working with Jones & Co., there were 8 artists on the roster, and I'll tell you, there were times when I needed to make an appointment with the program officer because I would take probably between 20 and 30 minutes just to sign the paperwork. I had that many grants. Dozens of them would be approved, and I would be in there having to read everything, go over everything.
It's a great problem to have.
Yeah, this is it. I'm not complaining, but I have seen that, and this is part of the reason why I wanted to do this podcast, is because there is a success to it. It is real. It is there. It is for the taking. Yeah. And I think if people know that, they'll take it more seriously, perhaps. Yeah. And we'll have people who are very talented and deserving of that funding getting the confidence or the knowledge or whatever it is to apply, and it will help them fulfill their full potential. Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you can put it together, whether it's working hard or connecting with the people who you need on your team who can do those things, I think that should be a positive thing.
Yeah. And for me, it's like 2 things in response to what you just said. The success I've had, I credit the lion's share of that to the fact that I've had the opportunity and the privilege to work with great artists who are doing great things and have been and would be successful on their own right without me.
Sure.
I don't think a great grant writer is going to be successful if they are not tied to or partnered with a great artist with a great vision, applying for funding for a project that has a high likelihood of success.
Yeah.
So it's like grant funding success. I think it's somewhat about, putting together a good plan and application, but then there, because these are often juried applications, there has to be sort of a general belief or awareness around the artist. You know what I mean? People need to know and understand that this is an act that is going to be successful. We should fund this because they're going to do the right thing with this money.
Mm-hmm. As a record label, you qualify for different funding programs than as an artist manager. Did that factor into some of your decision-making when you were trying to think about how you're going to grow your business, increase revenue, and how you can offer more to the artists who you want to work with?
Yeah, so setting up the label for me was a function of wanting to be able to offer a comprehensive suite of services to artists that I took on in a management capacity who maybe didn't have that kind of representation or who we weren't able to secure that kind of representation for. I started off with the intent and the vision of like always wanting to find a higher level, independent or major label partner for the acts that I work with, but knowing that I have the opportunity to offer them, distribution and label support if that doesn't come through. So I was lucky enough, James Boyle of the Halifax Pop Explosion Festival and Conference connected me with the folks at Select Distribution in Montreal. And I don't know why they signed up a distribution deal with me, but I guess I convinced them that I was going to do the thing.
Yeah.
And so that's who I'm working with on that side. And then one of the sort of byproducts or symptoms of the fact that I now have this label branch is that it has allowed me access into Factor's comprehensive music company program. So because I offer artist management, because I offer record label services, and because I offer music publishing services, I have a lower tier rating as a comprehensive music company, which gives me access to approximately an $80,000 a year Canadian cap for funding, which I can assign to, any projects I take on through that program.
Okay.
Yeah.
And assign them to so if you wanted to do a release,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, then you can help support a release through that fund.
Yeah, it's similar to the
label.
juried sound recording program, which people might be more familiar with. So typically you're applying first for a sound recording grant/component, and often there is a marketing component attached to that initial application as well. And then with both the juried sound recording program and with the comprehensive music company program, once you're approved, you can add other components to your broader grant. So you could add like a video component to shoot a music video.
Right.
You could add a tour component for tour support funding, a showcase component for showcase support. And then with my lower tier comprehensive music company rating, I have up to that approximately $80,000 a year amount to split between any projects I take on during that year.
So then how do you get up to the next rating?
So I'm actually in the process of reviewing that because I think the rules have changed a little bit. Okay. But from what I understand, you have to have at least an average of $100,000 in gross revenues over your past 3 fiscal years.
Okay.
I think you have to have been active as a company for at least 5 years.
Okay.
And then there are thresholds in terms of how many management clients you have on your roster that are active. I believe it's 2 or 3. And then you have to have a certain number of releases within the past 14 months and a certain number of sort of releases just in your back catalog more broadly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And so when you see that in your mind, are you sort of reflecting, okay, that's what my business is going to look like when it's built. It's going to have these things in it.
Exactly. Yeah. So it hasn't always been as focused or intentional as like trying to build a blueprint around the way that funding is handed out. It's kind of been a hybrid of that, but mostly focusing on being able to offer my artist management clients services that they may need if we don't find appropriate partners in those service areas for them.
Yeah, it's like a win-win.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I've also, tried to blueprint myself based on the way I see other more established, successful companies building. I think about Sonic and all of their divisions.
Right,
Think
that's
about
a good example.
Exactly. Coalition Music in Toronto started Artist Management. They have a label. They have the Canada Music Incubator. The companies that have established themselves and maintain a dominant position in the market over the last 10, 20 years, they have multiple branches. And then the other part of it for me is, knowing how much work it is to be an artist manager, and maybe, I love it now, and I think it'll be great for the next 10, 20 years, but thinking of myself at 50, 60, 70, I think I'm someone, going back to my dad. He's continued to work. He retired from the military, retired from the hospital, built out his company, all that sort of stuff, but he's still working full time.
Wow.
And I think he will for as long as he can. And I think I'm going to be that kind of person too.
Right.
So trying to think about building out the company in such a way that, I could step away from it in the future, building out a real business with systems and processes that don't require the legal phrase is like a key man or a key person,
right?
To be in position to run it.
So you can take a step back.
Yeah.
In the future, and choose to work on and focus on the things that you really want to, where you're really needed, where your skills and specialties are best applied. And then you're able to grow. That is really exciting. Can you share with some of us, some of your secrets to success when it comes to grant writing? If there is such a thing, something that people who are listening to this, who are thinking of, say, applying in September for some funding, what is some advice you would give them?
Yeah, well, like I said, my successes have been primarily, I think, credited to, or can be credited to, having had the opportunity to work with really great artists and people. In terms of you're thinking about the mechanics of actually writing the grant application. I guess so,
but you're bringing up a really good point. If you're an industry person, align yourself with the artists who are working hard.
There you go. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Be thoughtful in who you choose to work with. And I know for myself, I think one of the reasons I have a high success rating is because I won't put in an application unless I'm nearly 100% sure it will be approved because it's a good fit, because the artist is eligible, because all of the reasons. You have a good plan, good people.
And I think you have to be resilient and persistent too. I don't want to paint a misleading picture of myself or my own successes. I think about the juried sound recording program with Factor. I have never been approved on a first application for the juried sound recording program. It's always been on the second.
Wow.
And now you're only allowed to apply twice, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
So you mean you're only allowed to apply twice?
Well, they only have 2 deadlines now.
Right. But even if it's not approved the first time?
Well, no, sorry. There's a chance that you might be able to apply the second time.
Right.
So if you apply for the first deadline and you're not approved, in most cases, you can't apply again that year. But if you're in the I think it's the top 20 applications that were not approved.
Right.
So if you're in that 0.5% sort of away from being approved kind of range, there are, I think it's 20 applications that they allow to be resubmitted. On the second round.
People are so close.
Exactly. But when I started, they didn't have that rule in place. So we would always leave 2 deadlines worth of room. But you can't use that strategy anymore. That particular game has changed. But I'm not as reliant on the juried sound recording program now because I have access to the comprehensive music company program. Yeah.
So that was smart strategy right there.
Yeah. Well, and a little idea that I have that's not fully fleshed out, and maybe it's not smart to present it now, but I will anyway. I've thought okay, if I was a band or an artist starting right now and I was really trying to blueprint around or game the current grant funding system, how would I best approach that? And knowing what the criteria are for getting the comprehensive music company lower tier rating, I think I would band with as many other artists as I needed to get to that $100,000 gross revenue threshold, incorporate run all of our money through the company for 3 years until we have had enough of a financial history to qualify for the comprehensive music company, and then create a strategy with my other artist partners in the company where we're releasing, 1 or 2 or 3 albums a year so that we each, as owners of this company, get access to the money to put out an album every 2 years.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah,
I love that idea.
That's the big idea.
Oh, that's fun.
The problem with it is that it relies on Factor being around.
Right. And that program being the way it is. And like
Exactly.
you just mentioned, that's one of the tricks to it. If we're talking tips at the end here, is read the program guidelines. I am shocked and surprised how many people will contact me about writing a grant and they haven't read them themselves. And I get it. They want to hire me because they know I have that knowledge or that I'll take the time and do it.
Yeah.
But it's also, I believe, in the artist's best interest to read it at least once. I mean, it's the summer.
Yeah.
Take a piece of, your computer outside and just sit with it and read it so you know it, then you'll always know it. So reading the program guidelines, being on the up of what's changing
Exactly.
and why things are changing, I think is important too.
And another key lesson and something that we always did is as much as possible, only plan for projects that you're going to be able to afford to do whether or not that grant funding comes through. I think if you build your business model around a reliance on grant funding, it's going to have potentially stunt your growth and your ability to do the things you want to do. Mm-hmm. We've built plans around things that we're able to do, and if grant funding comes through, that's great, and it makes it a little easier. But if not, we're still going to do the things that we need and want to do and identify as important.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think that's the safest way to approach it, because you're right. It's not guaranteed. You don't know who's on the jury. You don't know the other applicants. There's a ton of talented people here in the East Coast and in Ontario and now out West, like you're probably discovering.
Well, and even if you have a track record of successful applications, you have zero entitlement to that money and you have zero guarantee to it. It's a privilege to be granted it when it is, and it's a gift. You know what I mean? Well, it's not a gift because there are some obligations, but you know what I mean? It's
it shouldn't be relied on. It shouldn't be so much of your business model that without it, you can't run your business.
Exactly.
You've got to be mindful of the actual revenue. And it sounds like you've been leveraging it too, because you can do that. You can leverage it to take yourself to the next level so that you're in a financially responsible situation, and then you work that way and you keep moving up, you grow your business.
And most of the grant funders are looking at return on investment, ROI, and if you can build and show a track record of responsibly using grant funding money to create more money for yourself, you're going to have a greater likelihood of being granted monies in the future. I think about contact style event showcases as a very specific example. So if I'm granted $5,000, or if a band is granted $5,000 to go to a showcase, and we come back and we confirmed $20,000 in bookings from that showcase, which is a thing that's happened, that looks great to the folks who gave you that money, because you took their $5,000 and you turned it into 20, and you're residents of the province. Now you're paying taxes on those monies, and you're using them to hire local service providers, and you need to have these successes to prove yourself. It makes you look great as an entity applying for funding. It makes your music industry association or your grant funder look good to the people that they have to report to, because that's something, I don't know if everyone's thinking about that consciously, but if I take money from Music Nova Scotia, they have to report back to the province of Nova Scotia.
That's right, who gave them the money.
Exactly, on how that money was spent and what the results were. Mm-hmm. And they need success stories.
That is one of the roles of the government, is to instigate is the word, not instigate, but to create economic prosperity for the people in its jurisdiction, for the people that the government serves. So part of that is investing in opportunities for the people that is going to create benefit for them economically, socially, in other ways. But in this case, with funding, it's about money. You set goals, achievements, and a lot of time return on investment too. So you're right. If you can demonstrate that you can do that, then it's going to make it easier for you to continue.
Yeah, and just in terms of my my own philosophy, I can understand and appreciate, and I often think about stuff that has artistic merit in its own right and may never have a return on investment the way some types of artistic output or some genres do, and how, funding maybe doesn't get directed towards those projects as much as it should. It's just a matter, I think, of knowing the system that you're playing within, that currently exists, and trying to do your best to make use of it and take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. That's really good advice. There's lots of programs out there. Some are based on return on investment. Some are for, for creating art.
Yep.
So you're right. If you take the time to investigate and look into those things, you're likely to find a place where you fit.
Yeah, and I think they're all trying to balance that as best as they can. Factor certainly does. Music Nova Scotia does. And I think there are bodies like maybe Arts NS or Canada Council that sort of veer slightly more towards purely artistic merit as opposed to return on investment. If you wanted to put sort of those two things on either end of a spectrum, like pure artistic merit on the left-hand side as I'm visualizing it, and return on investment on the other side, I think everyone's trying to get kind of in the middle there so that like they're supporting art, but they're supporting art that functions economically. Mm-hmm. But Arts NS and Canada Council, in my experience, have been grant funding bodies that have been more inclined to support art for art's sake.
Yeah.
Not tied to any kind of financial or business result necessarily.
Yeah. Sure, yeah. That's been my experience as well. I would say that too. So that is a good point, to get out there and explore more, not just what's here in your own province, in Newfoundland, in Nova Scotia, the provincial programs, but look outside for other creative ways to get funding too.
Yep.
This has been awesome to sit with you. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming in.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you like to listen to podcasts so you never miss a new episode of Granted. Produced by Krista, Keough and John Mullane at John's Studio in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Follow us on social media. We are at Granted Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, and you can follow us on Twitter at Granted_podcast.